So,
So,
yes?
this is how we're starting off the next 100 episodes, huh?
The next 100? What do you think, I'm doing this till I'm 62?
Nah, you'll probably be dead by then.
Speak for yourself.
Excuse me?
No, you don't get to come into my
What are you
video
trying
and...
to say? I'm fat? I will have you know, this is all muscle.
Uh-huh.
Alright, well I thought this video was supposed to be about me because you invited me over.
Well, I thought that we could maybe play some Donkey Kong Country in celebration of the 30th anniversary.
Sorry, kid. I'm retired.
But what about...
The party games? Oh, that's just me getting together with some of the Mario gang and... You know, it's just playing for fun. It's not really supposed to be anything serious, you know? It's kind of like a side gig. You get it.
Yeah.
So, are you gonna roll the intro, or...
30 years ago, today, November 21st, 1994, Donkey Kong Country was released for the Super Nintendo.
in North America?
Right.
You know, the United Kingdom release came out 3 days prior on the 18th. You could have released this video then, if you wanted to.
Yeah, but I live in...
And the rest of PAL territories on the 24th.
Would you just...
Japan on the 26th.
Is this my video or yours? I mean, you're not even a real gorilla. Look at your hands.
Listen, this episode wasn't cheap and sacrifices had to be made. Just pretend like I'm wearing gorilla gloves.
Today, 30 years ago, North American audiences broke out of their cages and unwrapped the holy banana horde of gaming known as Donkey Kong Country. Before I peel this video, I have to acknowledge that obviously Donkey Kong Country is a game that's talked about immensely on the internet. There are countless videos you can find on this game's impact. When it comes to reviewing the game, it's a bit pointless. Everybody knows this game is one of the best releases from the 90s. To call 1994's release of Donkey Kong Country a game changer is an understatement. Its effect on the gaming industry was monstrous. No, my plan is to take you down memory lane, not only to bring you back to the time before the game released, but also for a very personal look back at what this game meant to me. First, let's dig up a bunch of history. Born in 1985 out of a small English town called Ashby de la Zouch, video game developer Rare got their start working on ZX Spectrum titles. They began hunting for video game publishers in North America, setting up a location in Florida to attract companies like LJN, Acclaim, TradeWest, and more. During the Nintendo Entertainment System's reign of the early 90s, Rare's games were mostly licensed IP affairs with a few exceptions. Until their original release of Battletoads, it was clear evidence that the team was ready for bigger, better things, investing in Silicon Graphics workstations, also known as SGIs. Rare spent some serious cash when the next level of video games, the 16-bit era, was flourishing. With these computer systems, Rare became one of the biggest and most exciting developers to work for, despite the smaller staff. And it was Nintendo that took notice. After being shown a demo of a boxing game made with the SGI Next Level hardware and software, Nintendo was convinced and decided to invest heavily in Rare's company, making them a second-party developer for Nintendo. This means they made games for Nintendo's platforms but would retain their own identity. Fast forward to their first project under the name Rareware. When founders Tim and Chris Stamper asked to take on Nintendo's very own Donkey Kong franchise, they bit off more than they could chew. With 20 staff members, it took them over a year and a half to bring the ape to a modern gaming era via Donkey Kong Country, a 2D platforming behemoth which featured pre-rendered 3D modeled characters on a 2D plane that ran seamlessly. But what made Donkey Kong Country so visually appealing to audiences? I asked Kevin Bayliss, one of Rare's most important artists from 1988 to 2005, how the game got off the ground immediately after the Stampers asked to take on the Donkey Kong.
So a day later, I was handed a pile of fax pages from Nintendo of Japan by Tim Stamper, and I was asked to create a model of Donkey Kong, as they plan to use him for a new platform game using this rendered technology. I had free range to create him, and after building a very simple model as best I could, Nintendo were very impressed with the design. I think the only thing they asked us to add to the character was his iconic tie, to break his color up and give him more identity, so he didn't just look like a naked ape character. I guess it also gives him some kind of intelligence, if you read any kind of cartoon character logic into it. I would basically build models from skin curves using NURBS, a format using curves for models, which were then converted into thousands of tiny polygons when rendered.
So what happened after the frames were rendered?
After playing around with lights and cameras with the modeling software, I was able to render out individual frames of DK and Diddy Kong, which I also created, and create animation sequences using the skin model. The skeleton inside the model controls the geometry using a technique called skinning. Once the frames were rendered, we had our software guys come up with an algorithm to read the individual pictures, which contain alpha, a transparent channel, as if it were a cell from a traditional cartoon. And this was then converted and filtered down into a palette of only 15 colors from the original thousands that were used when the SGI machine rendered out the image. This converted image was then saved as a sprite, which is the name used given to an image which we can move around on the game console, utilizing the transparent channel so that it can be overlaid over the background of the game.
But Donkey Kong wasn't the only playable character. Meet Diddy Kong, created by Kevin Bayliss as a secondary playable character in 2-player mode, or when trading off to him via tag in single-player mode. Diddy Kong was shorter, quicker, and offered a slightly different feel when playing as him. Whereas Donkey Kong was the powerhouse that could slam the ground for bananas, roll into enemies, and take out the bigger bad guys, Diddy offered speedier motion, a higher jump, along with his iconic cartwheel. He was a fun alternative to the main hero. Kevin gives a little bit of information regarding his creation of Diddy Kong. Initially, I thought it was the other character designer, Stephen Mayles, who created Diddy Kong, but Steve turned me back around to Kevin.
I didn't create Diddy, that was Kevin Bayliss. Originally, I believe he was intended as a revamped DK Jr., but turned out so different he couldn't be Junior, but everybody liked the character, so Diddy was made another relative, a brand new character. But check with Kev.
Back to Kevin I went. I asked him if he was the one who created the box art image for the game, and he said,
I didn't do that. As soon as I built DK and Diddy, I moved 100% onto Killer Instinct. I had no idea they wanted a sidekick. After creating DK, I got back into Killer Instinct. Then Greg Miles came into my office one day and said we needed one, as far as I can remember.
The premise of the game is simple enough. Donkey Kong heads down to his banana hoard only to find his bananas are missing, stolen by the evil King K. Rool and his menacing lizard army called the Kremlings. I asked Steve more about the origins of the Kremlings.
An early concept existed around the time when the Kremlings were going to be in another game pre-DKC. It has been posted on Twitter before. It was more realistic than K. Rool turned out. I didn't use it for my version. Greg usually did a little thumbnail sketch of everything, so it was probably the same for K. Rool, a fat crocodile. This was the only guidance, so not that much. I think Greg had already designed the fight where he throws his crown, so he obviously needed that. K. Rool was the last of the Kremlings to be made.
Along with the two heroes were the elderly, wisecracking Cranky Kong, who was the original Donkey Kong from the 80s, Funky Kong, 90s Tastic transportation assistant, and Candy Kong, Donkey Kong's pin-up girlfriend. I was curious about the creation of Candy, so I asked Steve to fill me in. Was he the one who made her?
Yeah, probably my worst character. I struggled with the task of making an attractive female monkey. I didn't want her to be on all fours like DK, but the human shape I ended up with was a bit odd also. But things were rarely redone in those days, there just wasn't time, so into the game she went.
In addition to these helper characters who either gave you tips, help you to get to different places, or save your progress, there were also animal buddies the Kongs met along the way. Journeying through all 6 worlds and 40 levels of the game was tough. That's why there were different animal friends that the Kongs could unlock for a short period of time to assist. There were 5 animals in total: Rambi the rhinoceros who could bust open secret doors, Speedy Swimmer on Guard the swordfish, Squawks the parrot who lit the way in certain dark cave levels, Winky the high-leaping frog, and Espresso the gliding ostrich. I always thought Winky's movements were so erratic, so I asked Steve some info on Winky Frog's creation and the animals in general.
Kevin Bayless did the concept, and that was one of the few characters I didn't make. I think a guy called 80 Smith made it. I did do the animation for him, so a team effort on that one. Animals would be chosen for abilities needed for gameplay, so something to smash stuff, something to jump high, something to run fast, etc. I think Rambi was most people's favorite. He was the first to go in and felt a lot of fun. Winky was definitely most hated, as his jump animation, coming from a hop animation, caused many an unfair death jumping off the end of platforms. Would he jump this time or not? It was a bit of a lottery. Legs should have been much shorter for gameplay, but we were trying to keep stuff pretty natural, hence the long, froggy legs.
Oh my god, this is so boring!
Seriously? This is a goldmine of behind-the-scenes details. What more do you want?
Come on, any content creator can fill in all the technical details. We want excitement. We want passion. We want...
A shameless self-promotional VHS tape from Nintendo?
You got it!
So far, we've talked a bit about the history of creating Donkey Kong Country. But what was impressive to me growing up was the marketing of Donkey Kong Country. In 1994, a few months before the release of the game, Nintendo Power, Nintendo's magazine to showcase all the new games coming out for their console and handheld, sent this bad boy in the mail. Almost 20 minutes of this goofy dude taking us through Nintendo's Redmond, Washington location, showing us exclusive behind-the-scenes footage of the game we'd only read about in the pages of the magazine.
These guys are so easy.
This is Armand, and this is Rich.
Hey, how you doing?
Oh, hey. These guys test Donkey Kong Country for a living. We have hundreds of areas in Donkey Kong Country, and these guys have to play each area probably 100, 200 times each, weeding out all the bugs. This is a prototype board. There's 8 chips on this, 4 meg each, which makes it a 32 meg game, the biggest game ever. This 32 megs allows us to do a variety of action and a variety of backgrounds.
I must have watched this thing 50 times in the months leading up to the release. I became obsessed with Donkey Kong Country, but then I got to play it. Remember these demo stations? Sure, they still have them nowadays, but back in the day, these were our demos. No sitting around waiting for a game to download onto our console, no. We had to go out in the freezing cold, journeying our way to our local Toys R Us, with our parents' permission, of course. But once we were there, it was like pulling teeth to get us off these machines. I remember visiting Toys R Us to play the first level or two of Donkey Kong Country, being mystified by this wonderful game's graphics. I couldn't believe how lifelike and real they looked. Keep in mind, this was when 3D games were in their infancy. While games like Star Fox were impressive, this was on another level. Back to the videotape, we learned about something called ACM, or Advanced Computer Modeling.
How do we make the roundness, the 3D?
Actually, it was created on the challenge, first in a wireframe. Actually, then you grow shade them, or you can Phong shade them, and then you actually texture map them. And you can even trilinearly bitmap interpolate.
That sounds a little dangerous. Let me ask you this. I heard downstairs something about ACM
Yeah,
technology.
that's advanced computer modeling. Basically, what you can do with it is it lets you create fully realistic, fully rendered 3D graphics, so the person has a sense of really being there. Same computers that were used in Terminator 2, Jurassic Park.
Essentially, the developers would create a model using wireframes that could be fit with limb movement after the textures were created. This also performed on the backgrounds, giving them a rounded, lifelike quality via the textures mapped to them. But while I had heard of ACM via the VHS tape, I also learned of something called NURBS, which we've talked about earlier, or non-uniform rational B-splines. This is what was used to make the box art for games like Perfect Dark, which I learned about when we talked to Kevin Bayless about this during the making of my Perfect Dark retrospective. I asked Steve if ACM had anything to do with NURBS, and it turns out they were one and the same. I asked if this was just Nintendo's way of making a buzzword for it in marketing, and he clarified.
I guess ACM was the whole process of getting it on the Super NES, but yeah, same thing. Advanced computer modeling sounds a bit catchier than non-uniform rational B-splines.
There you have it, Nintendo's very own blast processing. Now to clarify, NURBS is used to make the models, but then the content is digitized to allow it to be used within the game, say for example the sprites seen on the screen. It's all really impressive, and with Donkey Kong Country being such a landmark for pre-rendered video games, its legacy changed the way video games were made. It was a direct inspiration for Sega's attempts at the pre-rendered look, namely the Sega Genesis title Vector Man, and later Clockwork Knight on the Sega Saturn. Donkey Kong Country's locations were massively impressive, from the Congo jungles where rain and sunshine would beam down, to the monkey mines where creaking mine carts, caverns, and temples awaited players. We got to see unique locations far and wide. Vine Valley was filled with lots of vine-based platforming challenges, as well as Donkey Kong's bitter cousin, Mankey, who would throw barrels at you if he saw either Donkey or Diddy approaching. Gorilla Glacier offered a frozen journey through some of the most visually impressive snow-based moments I've ever seen in a video game. I remember watching this on the videotape and being amazed at how real the snow looked, being awestruck at how many snowflakes flurried across the screen. Next, the cling and clang of Creme Croc Industries Incorporated, bringing some modernization to the jungle for better or for worse. Before the final showdown, the last world is Chimp Caverns, which featured some of the hardest platforming in the entire game, complete with foggy mines, platforms controlled by fuel barrels, and more. The final battle takes place between Donkey, Diddy, and King K. Rool on his ship, and it's home to one of the most memorable final boss battles of my childhood. Just trying to get down the patterns to take him out really takes me back to being a kid again. When Donkey Kong Country came out in 1994, I was 11 years old. I was just a few months into 6th grade at the time, and I remember the feeling of fear transitioning from elementary school to middle school. It was hard to make new friends, as I was always a bit of an introvert. But Donkey Kong Country helped me come out of my banana cave a bit and meet new people, teaching me an important lesson about so-called friends who may try to use you to get what they want.
Bro, are you getting introspective in this retrospective? You can't do that!
Why not?
Because nobody cares about your childhood, they just care about their childhood. Heck, half the comments are going to be about people reminiscing about how this game meant so much to them.
Well, this is my channel, and I'm gonna run it how I want to run it. Cereal?
Hold up, is that a 30-year-old box of cereal?
Come on, you really think I'd serve you a 30-year-old cereal? Of course it is. Dig in. I remember being absolutely obsessed with this game in 6th grade. I asked for the soundtrack for Hanukkah that year, along with a bunch of other merch from the Nintendo Power catalog. I remember using some of the toys as a visual aid for a report on animals that we had to do. And of course, I had to pick gorillas. I remember getting into a physical fight with someone who made fun of the pre-order shirt which I wore proudly in school. Yeah, I looked up that shirt on eBay. I was gonna use it as a fun prop for this episode. Turns out it cost $300.
$300? What do they think we're made of? Patrons?
No, but for the small price of just $1, you too can be a...
Oh, you are so tacky. Advertising your own Patreon in the middle of a video? God. I mean, that's like when you go to a movie theater and they advertise for the movie theater while you're sitting in the movie theater. Like, bro, we're already here. You got us. Stop it.
Yeah, you're right. I should really know better than to self-promote right in the middle of a video. When this game came out, I got it for Hanukkah as well, and I was one of the first kids in my school to have it. I remember talking about how good the game was, and this kid, let's just call him Bob, overheard me talking about it. We started talking about video games, and specifically Donkey Kong Country. He asked if he could come over and play it, and I said sure. It was a rare opportunity to step out of my comfort zone and make new friends based on similar interests. But after we beat the game together, he stopped talking to me, and didn't want to hang out anymore. I never figured out why at the time, until I realized years later that he was just using me so he could play the game. Back then, not everybody got every game at release, and since Hanukkah that year was in late November through December, I got it before most of the Christmas celebrating kids in my class. I'll never forget how that feeling of being used made me feel.
Was it the same feeling as eating 30-year-old cereal? Because if so, I know what that feels like now. Ugh.
Huh. Free t-shirt offer. Wonder if it still works. Let's find out. 3 weeks later. Look what just came in the mail. Oh yeah, that's right.
At least you're married. You don't have to worry about attracting women wearing something like that as a fully grown adult.
Ye of little faith. Check it out. I think she's digging me.
First you feed me 30-year-old cereal, then you try to steal my girlfriend. What's next? You gonna use prop money to buy a shirt instead of gorilla gloves?
La 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 la! Nope! Can't hear you! Nope! Probably the most exciting parts of Donkey Kong Country were the barrel blasting, particularly in the first snow stage. There's a section where you can either use a secret to bypass the hard part, or step up to the challenge. There's something so serene about blasting from barrel to barrel with the snow pouring down. The variety of enemies in Donkey Kong Country is perfect. Sure, we got Kremlings, jumpy Kremlings, biting Kremlings called Claptraps, camo tank top wearing beefcakes called Crusha, then there's Clump, a rotund army Kremling. Those are certainly nipples, alright. The most terrifying enemy has to be Rock Croc. It only appears in one of the mine areas where you've got to race to turn the barrels on before they turn off. If they turn green, these guys move back and forth in a creepy fast way. There's also these vulture guys named Neki, plus evil beavers, as well as the angry bees named Zingers. These guys even have boss versions at the end of each world. Wait a second, Neki's nuts? Naughty beavers? What's up with the sexualized boss stage names?
To be honest, that just might be a you thing.
In most levels outside of the water-based ones, there are bonuses you can find. These usually lead to things like 1-ups in the form of balloons, or a chance to collect letters that spell words, or a banana collectathon. Finding these bad boys can be quite challenging, but nothing brings out the full-on feel of shame like trying to get 101% in the game. When Candy saves your game, you can see where you're at for the percentage completed. If you just beat the game normal, you get 100%. But there's a very secret bonus in the first Krem Croc Industry stage, and if you miss it or screw it up, the game makes it that not even a reset of the cartridge without saving will allow you to try again. Yep, that's it. Smell that bittersweet scent of childhood failure setting up a perpetuating need to get 101% in every game going forward. It's games like this that explain why we grab items we don't need or are maxed out on. The only way to get back to that bonus is to completely start the game over from scratch, which is a wildly antagonistic thing to do to a child. How dare you, Rareware? How dare you? So we've talked about the unbelievable graphics, the merch, the behind the scenes, the characters, the enemies, the bonus levels, and the story. But one of the most important parts is the music. Created by David Wise, Evelyn Fisher before she married and became Evelyn Novakovic, and Robin Beanland, Donkey Kong Country's soundtrack is a musical experience. Most of the tracks were from David Wise and Evelyn Fisher, with Robin Beanland composing the head boppin' beats for Funky's flights known as Funky's Fugue. One of the best tracks Evelyn composed was Forest Frenzy, which builds instruments onto itself as the track progresses. Most of Evelyn's tracks are more ethereal or whimsical, like the Ice Cave chant. David Wise's contributions are standouts, from the iconic DK Island swing, to one of the best water tracks in the history of gaming, Aquatic Ambiance. Look, I could go on and on about the amazing music, but here's what David had to say about his experience working with Evelyn and Robin, as well as his inspirations for his tracks. This segment of an interview is from my podcast, XVGM Radio, which I co-host with my friend Justin Schneider. We interviewed Grant Kirkhope and David Wise about Yooka-Laylee's 2 soundtracks and how games like Donkey Kong Country influenced those titles. Link down below for the full episode.
I took Robin's, he had a track from Killer Instinct, which he was working on at the time. So he gave me some of the samples that he'd done because we had very little sample space. And so I converted it to run on the Super NES. So yes, it was fortunately donated by Robin.
What was it like working on the Super NES with multiple composers all at once? Was that a challenge?
Evelyn was fairly new to the company, so I was basically training her up to do the stuff on the SNES at the time. So she contributed almost half of the soundtrack, I believe. I'm not quite sure, but it was around 40% of it. So I was helping with the SNES because if you've come from a background where you're using keyboards and a digital audio workstation, however early, and then you've got to actually type the thing in because we're typing this all in hex.
Oh yeah.
All machine code. It was very difficult, and so I was helping her with learning the programming, and I did the same with Grant for the. I don't know. You convert to DKC too.
Yeah,
Yep.
which we're going to get into.
It was one of Grant's first jobs when he got there.
Yeah,
It was the first job, right?
yeah.
Absolutely. And it's quite a job taking music, turning it into code, and still making it sound musical. So that's where we started with Evelyn.
Okay. So when you were writing music for Donkey Kong Country for the first one, what was kind of your inspiration? Because the Donkey Kong games in general didn't really have that much music. I mean, there was that tune that you kind of incorporated in the opening of the game, but other than that, it didn't really have that much music. So where were you drawing inspiration from?
Everything I was listening to at the time. When we first saw it, it was basically a jungle. So I went and listened to every single tune. I can remember listening to Gorillas in the Mist and many jungly type things. Tarzan, there was a lot of Tarzan and for inspiration. So I was just pulling in all these different bits from so many companies and composers, just trying to mangle something together that sounded jungly.
Yeah.
More shameless self-promotion, huh?
Hey, the video's almost over. I gotta get it in where I can. Before we end, I gotta highlight Gangplank Galleon and one more snippet from the interview about one of the best boss fight tracks of the 16-bit era, a heavy metal explosion after a short pirate intro ditty. What like mainstream music would you say that you were invested in that maybe influenced this particular track, since it's more of it's got that heavier tone to it?
Well, specifically at the end, the week before I wrote it, I'd been down to London at it's like a specialist recording thing, and one of the companies there, they were demonstrating, it was probably Jackson guitars or something like that, and so there was a very intimate stage for about 150 people, and onto the stage came most of Iron Maiden.
Yes.
And they were demonstrating, and we got the drummer Nico McBain and the bass player and the guitarist, and they're doing it as a three-piece. So it had a very intimate kind of demonstration of the sort of stuff that they did. So it's literally because I've been listening to Iron Maiden about a week before I wrote it.
Yeah.
They had quite a bit of an effect on the influence of that track.
That's really cool.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah, run to the hills, right? Run to the hills.
Yeah, Run to the Hills.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's that makes a lot of sense. Iron Maiden's my favorite band, so that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And now we know where that like pseudo gallop is, and the the different harmonies kind of joined together. That makes sense.
That's really cool.
That's neat.
And the first part of Gangplank Galleon, I think it's part of a bigger tune. There's just I haven't listened to the soundtrack in full since I finished it. But I think there is a tune for Gangplank Galleon that doesn't have the bit, because that was used for the boss. But it kind of transitions, doesn't it?
Right.
So there's a whole arrangement of just the pirate type thing.
Oh, okay.
Just because Tim's quite into, Tim who ran Rare, he was very much into pirates at the time, so pirate music.
Donkey Kong Country led the way for multiple sequels, handheld spin-offs, and even a full 3D title on the Nintendo 64. When Rareware got bought out by Microsoft, Donkey Kong Country ceased to exist for quite some time outside of some puzzle game and racing appearances using the familiar visuals and characters. It wasn't until the mid to late 2000s when a new second-party studio that was owned by Nintendo would reclaim the Banana Throne. Donkey Kong Country Returns and its sequel, Donkey Kong Country Returns Tropical Freeze, aimed to return to the frantic, tricky action platforming from the 90s, albeit with some new ideas. Heck, even David Wise returned for the former, creating an all-new legendary soundtrack. But it was the original trilogy of games for me, specifically the first two, that really captured my attention. I'd never seen anything like Donkey Kong Country back then, and it was completely revolutionary for its time. Nothing could stand up to it. The game catapulted Rare into one of the highlights of Nintendo's developer arsenal, revitalizing one of the company's first mascot characters and showing the world that the Super Nintendo was not dead. The games extended the life cycle of the console and helped push Nintendo back into first place in the financial console wars, allowing them to outsell Sega in North America at that time. But for me, the game took me to another level of fandom that I didn't think possible. They got their hooks in me, turning me into a super fan of a character I really didn't have any experience with back then. From VHS marketing stunts to magazine merchandise and toy store demo kiosks, some of my most important memories of my youth involve Donkey Kong Country, a game that is just as vital to Nintendo's success story as it is for my own personal journey. I'll never forget Donkey Kong Country for as long as I live. So I guess I wanted to say, happy 30th anniversary, Donkey Kong Country. I hope you get all the banana cake you desire.
I don't know if it's the 30-year-old cereal or your sentimentality, but all of a sudden, I gotta hurl.
I better show Donkey to the bathroom before he shares his banana horde with you the wrong way. Come on, let's go. Thanks to all Patreon members, but especially the Morningstar Whip tier and up. They are Bryce, Venthros, Great White North Presents, Sam Schaefer, Scott McElhone, Trevin Adams, and Derek Demitter. Your support really helps with each and every review. If anyone is watching this and wants to help, feel free to join in the link below. For those who want to help in other ways, sharing the review on your social media really means a lot, as my channel has and always will be sponsored by viewers like you. Thanks for watching. Want more Dude You Haven't Played This Game? Check out the videos on the screen. Or head to my channel and grab the full playlist of reviews and retrospectives. I'll see you on the next Dude You Haven't Played This Game.